So, Andy, how did you get into spirituality?
Spirituality. Well, it has not actually been something of a great deal of importance or relevance. I shouldn't say relevance. I just didn't realize that it was relevant to my life until probably the last 10 to 15 years of my life. So, my family's not religious. We are your standard, or were when I was growing up, your standard Easter, Christmas Eve, and once in a while beyond that, churchgoers, Christian churchgoers. And we went to a non denominational church where it was not, for me, at all about spirituality. In fact, no one ever really explained spirituality to me at that point. Um, and it was really just about this thing that you go do. I knew about Jesus, um, and I honestly, as a kid, just viewed the whole thing as this obligation and sort of a ritual that we did as a family. Because there were a few years there where I guess we would go almost every Sunday, and I even was in a class to be confirmed, to go through confirmation, which I never completed. But uh, I didn't really, beyond that, come into anything as it relates to spirituality until many years later. Really, the first time that it was introduced to me, I had a girlfriend in college who did have a much more formal Christian background. And so she taught me, more around kind of the perspective of what Jesus and God are in relation to us. And by that, it was, that we are here as children of God that are born sinners, and we must learn to repent for our sins and kind of relinquish ourselves to God and to Jesus in order to be saved. And so at that time, I was going through some struggles, and it was helpful. And it definitely, I kind of bought into it, which probably makes some people cringe to hear me refer to it that way. But that's kind of how I look at it, is that I bought into it, to the sort of dogmatic side of it. Um, and honestly, it waned pretty quickly. I stuck with that for a few years. I moved, we broke up, and then I kind of dismissed it. And really, for most of my life and a good part of my adult life, I considered myself to be kind of agnostic, kind of atheist. I just didn't care, and I had a real scientific, kind of rational, masculine view of life. And spirituality wasn't a part of it. It was we are part of this sort of scientific evolutionary thing, and uh, I think the whole idea of souls and spirits to me seemed like woo woo, mumbo jumbo. And so it really then wasn't until I went through the breakup with my daughter's mom, and we went in an attempt to try to hold things together. At the tail end, we went and found a couples therapist who we went to one meeting together, my ex, myself, and the therapist, and I think our daughter even came. And then I tried to schedule more, and my ex wasn't interested. So I just continued to go to her by myself. Sometimes I'd take our daughter with us, but uh, it was then that I really kind of cracked open into spirituality. So she followed Marianne Williamson and practiced A Course in Miracles, and so I learned about that and kind of loosely went through that. And at that point, began to really kind of reevaluate what my place is in all of this, what my purpose is, what the deeper meanings of everything are, and uh, and that kind of unfolded. And there's a whole lot more to it. But before I get into it, I'm curious to know, how did you come to spirituality, and what early parts of your life did that have an impact on?
So, how I got into spirituality is that Early on in life, my parents went to church kind of as a formality every weekend. They just did it because I think their parents did it, and we just went to this very old school, I think it was a Methodist church, mainly did the Christmas holiday Easter thing. But when I really got into my own personal spirituality, I was in fourth grade. I at that time lived in a pretty rough neighborhood in Las Vegas, and we had some shady things happen. There was a creepy guy that would follow me and some kids on our bikes, and it scared the shit out of me, and it happened pretty consistently. And I felt so scared all the time. And it just so happened that one of my neighbors had a few younger kids, and she was part of this Assemblies of God, really radical Christian church that was doing speaking in tongues and faith healings and all sorts of stuff. And she knew of this girls group that was kind of like Girl Scouts at that church, and asked me if I wanted to go. And I thought, sure, I'll go. So I went with her and her family to the church, and the women at the church asked if there was any prayer requests, if any of us kids were going through something. And immediately I was like, yeah, there's this creepy guy in the neighborhood that's been like following us, and no one seems to be helping us kids, and like, I don't know, I'm just scared and I can't sleep. So they prayed with me, and next thing I know, I never saw the guy again. Never once saw the guy ever again.
Wow.
And I started to believe like this prayer stuff works. And I knew about Jesus from earlier on, but this church seemed to have this like relationship to Jesus, and I wanted to be part of that. So I kept going for a few weeks, and eventually I asked Jesus to live in my heart. And next thing I know, my parents start coming to this church, and this church ends up being like really popular in Las Vegas, and people start coming in masses because healings are happening, and there's movies going on about it, and it really changed me. So I was pretty hardcore into the evangelical Christian movement all the way through my early teens, and then this church went through a big split, a lot of controversy was happening, and my parents quit going. And at that same time, I was just kind of over it, because I was kind of starting to develop a curiosity about my own life, and I felt angry at kids at the church, and I don't know, I was just kind of exploring myself. And so I quit going to church altogether, and I went down to more rock and roll, punk rock, gothic scene, and started to find some kind of deeper sense of self in that. And then I got myself in a lot of trouble, and my parents forced me to go to church when I was 16. And I kind of lived a double life. Like, I was very into church, very much believed in Jesus, very much prayed, but then I also still skateboarded, went to punk shows, lived this other alternative life, and kind of was split between I believe in it, but I don't believe in it. And I eventually became such a part of the Christian scene because my family was going through so much stuff that the church family became my safety net. And all the way through my early 20s, I stayed involved in church because the community, and I needed somewhere that felt safe, because I initially went to feel safe. And they were good, safe people for the most part. There was always drama in the churches, but I was mixed up because I didn't always believe and agree with a lot of the church values. So around early 20s, I started going to a very Buddhist type yoga practice. And I happened to tell a few church people, and everybody gave me so much shit for it and told me I was doing a lot of satanic practices, and went on a mission trip to Africa. And
with your church you did?
No, I actually should back up and say that I became part of a very, very popular young adult missions organization, very popular. And I went with them for a few months, trained with them, went with them for a few months to Tanzania, Africa, lived with a bunch of tribes, went through all these life experiences that were so good, but that completely stripped my Christian view right then and there. I
Why?
Well, I saw a whole different way of seeing God, seeing life, seeing nature. I went to go
in
tell
Africa.
Yeah, I went to go tell them about the Bible, and I was there on a mission to go save them. And I get there and realize, what right do I have to save them? These people have a whole different perspective and worldview, and they've been here a lot longer.
History, traditions.
Yeah. And so it was one specific farmer was out there, and I asked him if he knew God, and he laughed. And the translator said that he said, like, look at it, it's all God. And I wasn't raised to see it like that, and it just blew me away. And it's forever stuck with me, and developed this curiosity. And then another woman was really upset that we were there, and she's like, how dare you white kids come into our village and tell us how it is when we've been doing these practices forever, and we just prayed for rain and made it rain, and like we have our traditions, and you're telling us they're wrong. Like, how dare you come in when you guys need to be saved, when your own culture's suffering, and you guys are blinded by your materialism and greed, and you guys are so divided by walls and homes. You guys don't live like a tribe. And that again just was like, oh God, why am I here? So to sum it up, I went home very, very mixed up. I turned 23 while I was there. I was in a relationship, came back, got married, and quickly moved to Portland, Oregon, where we're at right now. And I needed to just get away from everything I knew. So we bounced to Portland, where we didn't know anyone. And I just started kind of sifting off my beliefs. I think you kind of had a similar situation.
Yeah. So I love that story, by the way. But so spirituality, for the greatest part, happened to me in Portland, since I've been in Portland, which has only been 5 years.
Yeah, me too.
But you've been here for
14
years. Yeah. So back to what I was mentioning. So I started seeing this therapist in the Midwest in Ohio, where we lived at the time, who introduced me to spirituality. And it wasn't just Marianne Williamson's work, but like concepts around manifesting, concepts around like channeling, and around like kind of we would do tapping. And yeah, exactly. And a lot of meditation around. That's when I first started getting into meditation, thinking about this like beam of light connecting to a greater source, thinking about she explained concepts to me like that each one of us is sort of like little fingers in a giant hand. And it was funny because at that time, those concepts sort of rolled off me. Like, I got them, but I didn't get them. And I was going through it. By this point, I had split with my ex quite a while ago, continued to see this therapist because I was in a new relationship, and went through a lot of struggles in that, and was in pain and suffering over the breakup of it. And she was helping me with it. So she would have me do things like understand, like I learned about the law of attraction from her, and I learned about what, in the way that she related that to me, was my neediness and my clinginess and my like grasping for this girl that was giving me all the signs that she didn't want to be with me. And the more she would pull away, the more I'd go to her. And so this therapist of mine, who I still hold very dear in my heart, I haven't talked to her in a long time, need to reach out, but she taught me, to just send my energy and lessons and messages of love to her, but to let it be. And she taught me about the concept of the one, which is calling in the one, which is something that I still believe, and credit to finding you. But I kind of wrapped my time up in Ohio and wound up, lots of things went on, made a decision with my ex, who I was doing shared parenting with our daughter, that we'd all move back west, and going back to Montana, where we're from originally, wasn't the right choice because our careers wouldn't make sense there. So it was like, okay, well, let's look at West Coast. California, Portland, Seattle. Those are the cities, like, kind of, or the areas that we're looking at. And I wound up getting a job in Portland. So moved here, and I think, as I mentioned in our other video about when we first met, that I spent the first 3 months of being in Portland, I was in this apartment, this duplex, by myself. And then our daughter came out, and I did 100% shared parent, or 100% parenting of her for the next 8 months. So about a year of being here, just like heads down. And in that time, really just kind of disassembling everything in my life, my beliefs, my feelings on things. I had, because of all the teaching I'd gotten from the therapist, and then some exploration into myself, I've always been super introspective. Like, I can think of times throughout my life where everyone else was out playing and running around, and I'm sitting inside spending hours just trying to, like, make sense of what it all is. And so during that time, I was exploring a lot of things, and what had happened to me is, leading into Portland, I'd really gotten a grasp on, like, I'm in control of my happiness. I'm in control of how I feel, and no one really taught any of that to me, other than, a little bit of, like, gleaning off of the teachings from this therapist of mine. A lot of it just kind of feels like it sort of was channeled through me, and I would get these sort of bits of information that would pop into my head that I didn't really know where they came from, but understandings about things. Eventually, my ex, my daughter's mom, or our daughter's mom, moved out, and at that time opened up for me the ability to go back to 50-50 time, where then, as I mentioned in that other video, I spent a ton of time just soul searching and trying to figure out what I believed, where I stand, what this all is, what I need for my life, what I want. And at that time, was reintroduced to psychedelics. And so psychedelics were a profound, and still are a profound, element of my growth and spirituality. But without going into great detail about the specifics of that, that's something we can share in another video. The time opened up in a just kind of like fire hose to the face sort of way. So all of a sudden, I started seeking out and searching any kind of spiritual input and or just self-help. And really, the way I like to look at spirituality happened to me by way of self-help. So it was first self-help and self-development, and me trying to explore and figure out, like, why do I have anxiety so much? Why do I feel depressed? Why do I get upset by, the way certain things happen in life, or the way certain people are with me, or my performance in things, and the way I behave, and really diving deep into understanding all of that was what led me into this real psychological based study, and understanding psychology, and then understanding science, and beginning to I got turned on to the it was Carl Sagan, and then Neil deGrasse Tyson redid all the Cosmos videos. So then it was like exploring all the Cosmos stuff, and then I learned about quantum physics, and then some of the, like, law of attraction stuff started to spill back in. So through that whole period, I was just really, and then I was taking psychedelics, so I'd go out in the woods and was kind of cracking everything open and going like, God, I feel so connected to the trees, and I feel so understood when I'm out here in this place under the bright, the big bright sky at night, and away from all the chaos of the city. And it really, again, was not like official spiritual for me until probably about a year of doing that I began to pick up a few books. And not long after reading a few books that were kind of like swirling around spirituality. So, like, I read who's the author that does, I wonder if we have it, Power versus Force, Daniel Hawkins.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so I read that, and I read, I think a friend of mine who's actually passed away got me the DVD What the Bleep Do We Know? And so I'd watch that. There's all these just little things that I, in my style, is to take information from that stuff, digest it, and then make it my own.
Right.
So I've never been like real book heavy, because I just was like, I got the tools to figure this out in myself. And, during that time is when I wound up meeting you. And you, of course, then showed me books like The Untethered Soul, which has changed my life and I've read dozens of times. And I think around that time too, I was starting to really like investigate and learn about, Wayne Dyer and about Ram Dass and about Deepak Chopra and who else? Abraham Hicks, and just at that point starting to really dive into all these spiritual teachers and all these ideas. And so during that time when we first started dating and I was really getting an understanding of it, spirituality then became this sort of like kind of ethereal lifestyle thing that I knew had healing involved in it and on the other side of it. But as you've known about me, like I have always had a very critical, skeptical side. So I've always had this side that came from the atheist part of me, that came from, honestly, my family. A lot of my family has this really like rational, grounded way of seeing things, and they're very masculine. They're not in the feminine, magical side of things. And so I hated all that crap. And in fact, in college, in Missoula, Montana, where I went to school, it's a big hippie town, and there's all these hippie and their woo-woo stuff, and I just was like, puke. Like I couldn't stand any of it. And also to what you mentioned, same as you, I was into punk. I was a punk rocker all growing up, so it was a big middle finger to everything, and anything that was like conformity was something that I lashed out against. But I would say that by the time I connected with you was when spirituality was really starting to take shape and form, but it didn't have a whole lot of meaning entirely for me, or rather what I should say, and what's been profound, and I'll talk about soon, is that my perspective on it was blind. Like I had, as I talk about in some of my other videos, I had my blinders on. Like I could see it inside a vacuum. And it made sense to me. It's like there's something good here, but I also kind of think it's bullshit. And so I'm just going to keep pushing forward with it and sort of try to sniff out whatever this thing is that might be valuable to me. And then, of course, you loved it. So I was kind of trying to be on board because I knew you were. And I got introduced to the whole scene here and the spiritual scene here and the kind of like festival scene and the DJ party scene and all that, then really kind of cracked it open. But I want to hand it back to you and ask, so what was it for you that that really kind of brought it into focus, spirituality, that is?
So when I moved to Portland, like I said, I kind of just like put all my Christianity in the back burner and just put it all on pause, because I had this like clear new city with no sort of I had no identity as a Christian here. No one knew me as anything. I did go to church for a quick amount of time with a few people, but I felt this like possibilities of being whoever I wanted, and coming to a city that had so much hippie and so much metaphysical stuff going on and so many new age ideas, it felt perfect. It felt like a very open land to explore myself. And ironically, just as all that was starting to come to the surface, in 2006, just 9 months after I moved here, my dad died suddenly. And that was 100% the catalyst for everything. He shockingly died, and I immediately went numb, so numb to where I didn't cry for 3 years. But before that, I went numb, and everything was just kind of blank in my life. And I didn't know where I felt with God or Jesus or anything at that point. It just felt like I couldn't cry, couldn't feel, didn't even feel anger. There was a lot of other turmoil in my house or in my family life, I should say. So I just felt numb, and I'll never forget just a few months after that, when I was just in the thick of this numbness, I happened to have Oprah on. I was a big time lover of Oprah.
Oprah Winfrey.
Yep. The only Oprah we all know.
Yeah.
So I had Oprah on because I was a faithful Oprah watcher, and she had Rhonda Byrne and the Secret Team on. And I remember watching it, and I was like, I know this stuff. I know the secret. I've watched miracles throughout my life. Like, I thought that was Jesus, and I thought it was the Holy Spirit, and I thought it was all this. And yes, it may be, and maybe it's not, but I know this. Like, I've lived so many miracles, which is why I kept going to church, even though I felt like I didn't believe in all of it. Now here's a formula as to why I'm seeing miracles in my life. I remember getting so excited about it, telling my then ex-husband and a few friends, and they're like, Candace, that's bullshit. But I was like, no, I believe it. And so that immediately set the tone of self-help books. Went and immediately bought The Secret, and I got so much flack from old friends for it. But I read one, and then I was reading Abraham Hicks, and then I'm telling my hair clients about it, and they're like, yeah, we know about this stuff. Next thing I know, the 4 Agreements comes into my life, and all of a sudden the 4 Agreements make sense. I moved to this new salon. It's the 2008, the economy's collapsing, and now I'm like, oh my gosh, gotta use The Secret through all this stuff. And this girl starts working with me, and she teaches me about the power of now. So then I start living in the moment, realizing like, oh.
Eckhart Tolle?
Yeah,
okay.
Eckhart Tolle.
Yeah.
Then I start like, oh wow, I don't need to freak out about the future. I just need to live in the moment while the economy's collapsing. And next thing I know, like all these like old feelings in my life are coming back of deep, deep insecurity of childhood trauma, and all this stuff's coming. And I had this very unique moment in my life where I had a few years I didn't have a lot going on between 2008 and 2011. I decided to go on this deep journey and pursue crying because I could not cry. And I was formerly a big crier, felt everything. But I started counseling, and I spent almost all my days off reading all these books I was learning about, watching any sort of documentaries related to spirituality. And I just spent that time just anything and everything I could, from Buddhism to Hinduism to shamanism to Satanism to pagan rituals to philosophy to anything I could possibly get my hands on and read. I was doing it. Yeah. And it shook up my marriage. My ex was formerly Christian as well, and he was bothered that I was opening all this stuff up. He later got a little more into it as well, but I started making new friends in Portland that were interested in all these things. Joined a meditation group where they were talking about aliens and using your third eye and all this stuff, and I just ate it up. I loved it. I loved magic, and I loved seeing miracles happen in my life. And slowly I was starting to cry. And there was one specific night that it all just came together. And that was Christmas night, 2010. I went to just some random Christmas party with my ex's friends. And I hadn't been high since I was a teenager. But there was a big old plate of pot brownies, and I decided to eat almost all of them.
Oh my God. And
I didn't know what the fuck I was doing because I was just eating them. They were so good, and I was like, I don't care. I have a few days off work. Who cares? And then it started to hit me like, Candace, you haven't been high since you're a teenager. You better go home.
Oh boy.
And so I immediately left the party with my ex and his brother, and I noticed I'm driving home and the lights are getting really wonky. And by the time I got home, it all set in. And I felt so much fear, so much paranoia. I didn't recognize my husband or even my dog.
Oh, geez.
I walked in and I was like, where the fuck am I? I don't even know this home. I was so disoriented, and I was crying. I started crying. That was it. I started crying. I was so scared, and I remember sitting on my couch, and I remember like looking across the house, and I saw my book, The Secret, and I was like, that's right. I just need to focus my attention on love and positive stuff, and I can get myself out of this scary situation. And like that, the room went white. I was high as a kite, and I just started sobbing years and years and years of stuff. And I remembered right then and there that I had the power inside of me. Like, I have the power in life. Like, everything I was looking to find security in and find hope in was all within me. And I could see it all night long. All these stories happened, all this stuff happened. And that night, I literally changed my life and have never been the same person since that night. I spent 16 hours on the floor crying that night, just healing, thinking about death, thinking about life, thinking about trauma, thinking about miracles. And it all makes sense to me. And then I started a path of doing more psychedelics from that day on. But my yoga practice got much deeper by that time. I started to really, really believe in miracles like I never have. I got into doing psychic work for people. I started developing my psychic practices, and I started doing tarot classes and started giving weekly readings to people, and started to really explore astrology, and started doing some Wiccan rituals, and really started to practice magic. And my life from there has really truly become about magic. And furthermore, it's waxed and waned. I was doing a lot of readings for a while, and then I started to realize I needed to work on my own life. And I've still do readings, but I've kind of slowed it down because I realized I needed to do a lot of work on myself. And where my practices recently come into is learning how to really just be in the moment and be really centered. And I'm watching the world go through a lot of chaos right now as this coronavirus is all the rage. And I really come into my practices all about just being with what is right now.
Yep.
And everything I've learned, I've kind of combined it all to just live in love right now and allow the feelings to come and go. I don't need to hide from the tears. I don't need to judge the tears. I don't need to judge the anger when I feel it. I don't even need to judge the happiness, but just kind of live more fluidly through life. I would say that I have a pretty eclectic view on religion and practices, and I don't really adhere to one. I just feel like I live in magic and live in love and peace, but I've pretty much practiced just being and realize that my money will come and go. You and I will feel deep amounts of love, and we'll feel a lot of anger towards each other at times. Things have happened. Things will always happen. Things I like and dislike will happen, but to be in the present moment with life.
Yeah. That's awesome, and it sets it up really nicely for me to bring it full circle with spirituality and my beliefs. So I after really immersing myself full on into this world of spirituality and all the magical, whimsical stuff that entails, and again, still fire hose to the face, learning about all of it, and always also carrying this, keeping a foot very firmly planted in reality or science, or kind of a masculine rational viewpoint. I tried everything from sound baths and sound healing, learning some about like stones and like crystals and stuff like that. Not a lot, but just kind of dabbling in it. Ecstatic dance, and going to meditation classes. When you and I first started dating, we went to we have some good friends who own a meditation studio, and we're going to and their meditation is a very street level, they present kind of that Eastern, founded in Eastern culture, Eastern India, but very approachable entry level meditation classes. And so you and I were going to those, and it's just mindful meditation. And through all of it, what I hear you saying, what I know what's going on with me, and what I think is what most people can relate to, that's so profound and awesome about spirituality and healing, is that we're inherently designed to struggle. And when I get into my beliefs in full here in a second, I think I can make really good sense of why. But we struggle, and so spirituality, we struggle, we suffer, and we fear. And spirituality provides safety and security and relief from those things. And so it's this wonderful thing when you discover it, because it's like, oh my God, my life's, I'm struggling, or I'm afraid, or I'm in pain. And then here comes spirituality, and it provides answers that truly work. But I will say that for a lot of people, myself included, you find yourself going, I don't know if this is just like a placebo pill. Kind of feels like bullshit to me. Kind of feels like a bunch of, snake oil. And for the longest time, it really did for me. And I just had to find it on my own. I had to truly, poke all the holes in it and really go through it all for sure myself, to be able to say, okay, I know what I believe. And I'm looking over at our books, and one of the things that I got into for a while was shamanism, and starting to understand a lot of the native traditions. And the Four Agreements, it's Don Ruiz, right? Don Carlos Ruiz, is that his name? Don Miguel Ruiz, and the Mastery of Self, and reading some of those books, and all the native traditions that tie into all this too, that was like, okay, the Native Americans and the South Americans and the Colombians and the Peruvians, these people have all these cultures and or traditions that involve spirituality, and like it's seemed to work for them. So there's got to be something there. And for me, what has ultimately happened is that I have really sat at the crossroads of self-help, self-actualization. So from a psychological standpoint, really understanding like what's actually going on in me, and how to actually engage with myself, and not just, so I think the biggest unfortunate symptom of humanity is that we live our lives blind to ourselves. We literally live our lives asleep. And so they talk about awakening, and that most people are asleep, and it's very true, because what has happened is, so at this crossroads of that, with spirituality, with ancient tradition, and with my own intuition, I've started to really just like kind of dissect everything and try to make sense of all of it. And so I've sat there and gone like, why do I behave the way that I do? And you and I have had extensive conversations. Just, it's too bad we haven't recorded all those hours upon hours, days upon weeks, months of these kind of deep conversations going, why did that interaction happen where I got triggered and upset by this, or I keep experiencing anxiety, or I keep finding myself repeating the same patterns? And it hasn't been until I have really gone, okay, enough's enough. Like, I'm holding up the mirror, and I'm going to be brutally honest with myself. Like, what the fuck is my problem? And why am I behaving this way? And going backwards to realize and recognize, well, gosh, the reason that I do is because I've just taken without question everything that I observed and taught and was taught. Like, I learned how to be by all of these people who did the same thing. They blindly just swallowed all the pills of whatever they were fed and went, oh, that's how life goes. I guess this is how life goes. And then they went around and said, that's how life goes. This is the way things are, and you have to be the way that we all do it. But they never stopped to go, but wait a second, why? And I do credit my punk rock upbringings, because that's always led me to want to challenge and defy. And so in exploring things, I came to some profound conclusions. And honestly, some of them haven't happened until very, very recently, like within even the last couple of months, where, all of this slow, iterative work where like I learn something and then think like, aha, I got it. And then learn more and be like, whoa, shit, I didn't have a clue. Now I got it. And then I learn something else. Whoa! And I imagine and anticipate that that's going to just continue to happen for me till I'm done. But where I'm at right now is that I've come to recognize there is this profoundly fascinating piece of being human that every single one of us experiences and goes through. That's almost like this clever, well, I'll just use the word trick that God, and I'll use the word God to describe it, put in place so that it made it entertaining or so that it creates something. And so what that trick is that in order for all of this to be, in order for you and I to be sitting here, in order for life to be happening on earth in this, what they call the 3D realm, you have to have duality. You have to have contrast. You can't have light without dark because it would just be flat. You need the dark to make it stand out as light and vice versa. You need sadness in order to have happiness, or it would just be flat. If you were just happy all the time, there was no sadness, you wouldn't really know it one way or another. So you need the opposing things, the opposable forces, in order for all this stuff to exist. Because of that, we trick ourselves. We trick ourselves into thinking that we are separate from everything. It feels like we're separate. I mean, there's space in between you and me. And so we go around thinking like, oh, life's like that over there, and then I'm in here experiencing life different from that over there. And I need to be more like that or less like that. And or I need to interact with that, but I need to be careful of that and be afraid of that because some of that is dangerous and can hurt me. And I know it can hurt me because it has hurt me. And what the trick is, or that's fascinating, and this is where you tie in the science, Albert Einstein and Heisenberg and all these great thinkers have proven this, quantum physics, quantum theory, that it's a field, it's a unified field. Like everything that we are, science has shown that you and me and the table and the camera and the couch is all energy and space. It's basically like light and space is all any of it is, and it's all constantly morphing and changing. Even though it feels solid, even though we feel solid, it's constantly going through a transmutation, a metamorphosis. And so we come into the world and believe that, but we're not able to visibly see that. It feels solid, so it feels like there's no like real connectivity between you and I. And as a result, it feels like I need to worry exclusively and entirely about what's going on in here, and then balance that or base that against everything else that's going on out in the world. I'm getting to the spiritual part of this here, and what we wind up doing is we kind of struggle and fight and defend and protect ourselves from the world around us. We spend our life trying to situate ourselves in our own best interest, opposing the outside world. And so, I was a case of that. I think most people are a case of that, where I was trying to figure stuff out and could not figure out like why I sometimes or more often than not didn't feel so great, and why I had struggle, and why I suffered through certain things, and I just couldn't seem to stop certain thoughts, and I couldn't seem to get myself out of certain habits and ruts, and it was because of self-help that I started to dig into this, make sense of like, oh, well, the reason for that is that I've learned a very limited view of how things go, and I am now. And then also that includes like all the ways that the media and the world says you need to be like this but not like this, you need to do this but not do that, and so I'm sitting there struggling and suffering because I'm trying to have my life be this sort of like fantasy way where it's just like perfect and smooth and happy all the time and there's never any pain or suffering or whatever. But I didn't understand that I can't have happiness and I can't even have humanity. I can't be a human in the 3D world without all those opposing things. Like
Right.
those things are required for me to be happy.
Right.
And life is equal parts, and I talk about this in my other videos, life is equal parts good and bad. and happy and sad and pain and pleasure. And I use quotes because those are just words that we label states of metamorphosis. So this is all scientific. I'm giving the very scientific approach to this right now, which is I figured out in all this dissecting and then spirituality coming into it that like, okay, actually what I am is this being that is existing because of differing sides, because of opposable things that creates this, that I'm light in space. But when you study quantum physics and you start to figure out unified field theory, I'm actually not, there's nothing dividing me from you and this couch and the whole thing. And Aristotle followed, I came to learn later that Aristotle was a big believer and proponent of the idea that, you know, while this is the word translucent? It's clear, air. This seems like there's space between us. It's just a different, it's a different density of this field of energy. So really, there's no lines. The whole fucking thing is one big being that's just morphing and changing and whatever. And all of a sudden, in discovering that, I'm like, well, shit. I don't have anything to be afraid of. I don't have anything to suffer over. And in fact, like, I had better get used to the idea, and this stuff has just come to me recently, and I have to just give a shout out to Pema Chodron. Pema Chodron's book, When Things Fall Apart, is my Bible and has changed my life. In that Buddhist mindset of oneness. And my favorite joke is, what did the Buddha say when he went to the hot dog stand, the hot dog vendor? Make me one with everything. Get it? And the irony is that when because of Pema and Buddhism, I've come to learn that like life is full of suffering and pain and discomfort and sickness and shit. But the only reason that I don't like them is because I've been trying to only be this other way. And I've labeled them as that. But the fact of the matter is this is a part of it. Sometimes I'm just going to suck. Sometimes I'm going to be a dork. Sometimes I'm going to feel like crap. Sometimes I'm going to hurt so badly and my heart's going to break and I'm going to feel terrible. And other times I'm going to feel great. But what now bringing full circle to spirituality has taught me is there is an incredible magical force. Whether you call it God or spirit or source, or you view it from the Christ consciousness standpoint, or you view it from the Hindu standpoint, many gods or whatever it is, or from my standpoint, which is we are all God. We are God. And notice I say we as in I, as in there is only one of us. There is one God that's creating the whole thing. And psychedelics has shown this to me extremely clearly now, where psychedelics have allowed me to remove all these filters from having this past that's left my blinders and left me very limited, removes all those to where all of a sudden, like, I become one with everything. And it's just this big, almost painting of color. It's just all color. And I, whatever you call it, the magical piece behind it that I like that science calls it is consciousness. It's awareness. It's awareness of itself. It's being aware that literally like none of this exists without consciousness or awareness. Science has proven that. There's a field of energy and it's a particle and its waves and it's flowing along, and then consciousness interrupts it by like imagining or seeing something, and whoop, out of that comes a Candace. Comes in Andy, and obviously there's all these cool processes that happen where a cell multiplies and all these different things happen in order for it to, the caterpillar to become the butterfly. But what's so profound to me is that spirituality for me at this point is there is one consciousness. That consciousness is spirituality. That God is this thing that is making all of this be. And the way I like to look at the whole thing is I like to think of a ball of clay and all the stuff, the coffee cups and the tables and you and me and the cows and the horses and the birds are all little like shapes that have been made out of this big ball of clay. And they constantly are morphing like claymation, birth, life, death, birth, life, death, birth, life, death. And as they die, they go right back into the clay. And the only thing that stays eternal forever is the consciousness. is the thing that's constantly making us aware and making us alive. And so we're afraid of this thing called death, when really all that's happening is we're just morphing. We're going to go right back into it and come back out. We won't remember because we get a whole life to use this to make sense of all of it. But it's where all that karma and reincarnation comes into play. And I guess going back to the spiritual standpoint of it, I believe that what spirit is, and where I have landed at this point in my life, is that each one of us has spirit. Each one of us is the spirit. Each one of us is the source. Each one of us is the consciousness, the God, that's allowing us to be in this precisely choreographed dance where we think we have control over it, and I don't believe we do. I think there's this element where we definitely get to influence it and we make decisions and whatever, but I think on some grander scale, it's a dance and everything's balancing. Everything's constantly, I'm big on the balance piece too. I think everything's constantly, the universe is always striking a balance. So if something is like, say you have an addiction in your life, the reason you're addicted to something is because it's working so hard to probably balance a great fear that you have of something else. And I go into that in my other videos about how people turn to addiction to avoid sitting, or the fear and the sitting with the discomforts that are part of life. But as soon as you can figure out, like, I have to sit with these things, I have to be a part of it, you become a spiritual master. That is enlightenment. That is awakening, in my opinion, is understanding that you are all things, and you don't have to run or fight with any of them. You kind of have to just let them happen, let them be, and you have to be, and they aren't so bad when you let them be. And so many people would argue that and say, well, what if somebody's running up to you with a knife? You got to get out of the way. I'm like, well, yes, you do. And in those instances, you do try to kind of protect yourself and in this realm survive. But like with the coronavirus, for example, right now, like what's been profound for me going through all this is everybody's out there freaking out. And I'm like, I am the coronavirus. The coronavirus is all of us. Everything is all of us. And the more I can view it from this spiritual standpoint of oneness, the more I know that, like, by relaxing, by not running away from it or bracing against it, which according to the law of attraction, just fearing it and dwelling on it so much that it actually like attracts it to you, I just let it happen. I haven't been sick. I got sick, but it wasn't with the coronavirus, and I just sat with that, and then I got over it, and it was shitty while I was sick, but it's been great since I haven't been sick, and I recognize like I probably needed that sickness to balance out this vibrant health that I have right now. Thanks for letting me share all of that.
Well, it's well said. It's
Thank
beautiful.
You.
I
Thank
think
you.
You summed up a lot of my beliefs and understandings. To add to that, and just to finish, I think one of my all-time favorite little parables is the Chinese farmer of what's good and bad.
I love it.
And that's something people can Google and find on their own, but
Yeah,
I like to always
Alan
say...
Watts does a video of it on YouTube, the Chinese farmer. Look it up.
What's good or bad? Because in the end, it all just is.
Yeah.
And I'm learning to sit with the isness and the beingness and realize like this is such a magical and profound experience we're having. And it took death, and it took almost a child kidnapper rapist, and it took some really hard shit in my life for me to see the goodness and the security and the safety and the fun and the magic and the warmth and the connections I have now. And to see that this is just a gift to embrace, because it's gone like a vapor. And so here we are, just experiencing the human experience.
Yeah,
and
so lucky.
We're very lucky and blessed to have it, and I see the magic every day. I mean, it's all so incredible and intricate.
Well, and I want to add something that you just said, because I think it's relevant and important to put out there, especially being a tried and true skeptic and a hater. I, guilty as sin, am one, have always been one, and have learned how valuable that side of me is, and have learned how important I need that in order to balance out this, more feminine side of me that's into the magic and the woo. When you talked about the isness, it made me think of that, the guy who's kind of a comedian who does, who mocks spirituality. and he did this video recently that he shows two spiritual guys fighting, and they've got their mullahs on, and they're eating kale, and they're going through all their
JP Sears.
There you go, JP Sears, and they are dropping all the buzzwords, talking about being a drop in the ocean eternal, and and talking about vibing at different levels, and talking about all the things that that we too also have explored and know about, and from an outsider standpoint, I know what it feels like to see all that stuff and to be like, ugh, God, that is so stupid, and those people are such like fucking wacko hippies that think this wooey whimsical thing is real. It's bullshit. And I can hear some of the people in my family viewing it that way. And so I want the audience to know that I'm well aware of that. And I can tell you that I went through all of this with that lens, with that viewpoint of, this is a bunch of bullshit, but I'll check it out. I'll see what it's all about. And that's why I've combined science and all that into it. And the thing that's fascinating that you will learn when you actually turn the attention around on yourself and just understand yourself, just learn about yourself, develop the awareness of yourself to know why you do what you do, why you think the way you think, why you're skeptical, why you're a hater. And what you find out pretty quickly is, whoa, I'm a hater because I'm afraid. I'm a hater because I have worth issues. I'm a hater because I've been told that you don't act like that. All this stuff that I learned is what I'm fixing to, and I'm going, you don't do all that weird shit. That's wacko. And it makes me think of how you've told me that some of your friends, when you first got into spirituality, suggested that you need to go get help. That they said that they thought you might be having a mental breakdown. It's such a crack up, because when you watch the way that people give it another 10 years, and it's going to be a normal thing.
Right.
I mean, like yoga, I love that in the coaching world, Tony Robbins talks about this. He's like, yoga 15 years ago was this weird practice that nobody was into.
Right.
Now there's a yoga studio in every freaking corner of America. So I like to encourage people, just try it on for size. If nothing else, just get a book on psychology and understanding why you behave the way you do. Look up the mother wound. Look up the father wound. Understand how the stuff that you learned from your parents, who are not at fault because they learned it from their parents, who learned it from their parents, is this blind leading the blind, and you're just walking around through everyday life believing everything you've been told. And when you start to examine it and dissect it and make sense of it, you're like, crap, the reason I've been hating all this is just because it's foreign to me and I don't get it, which is a pretty childish and kind of lazy approach to life. But when you can start to develop some emotional maturity, when you can grow up, because I think that there's unfortunately a lot of adults walking around the world who are just babies in big people bodies. And you can really start to understand, like, I'm responsible for me, and I can understand me, and I can make this life go a whole lot better if I just open up and stop gripping to seeing it only one way. And that is what has done it for me. And so I just wanted to add that because you made me think of it, talking about the isness, that everything just is, and that our job is just to be. When you go through the whole process and you unpack it little by little by little, which I know I'm not done doing, you find in there that it truly is all relevant. It truly all is necessary. Every last bit of everything that is in life, though we may not want it to be that way, though we may wish the coronavirus wasn't throwing things off, though we may wish we, didn't have to worry about whether or not we're going to get toilet paper. As hard as that is, it is. And if you can relax into it and just trust, like, this is the way it's supposed to go right now. And, if it comes down to having to use dish rags to wipe my ass, I guess that's what I'll have to do. But I'm just going to sit back and watch it happen. And today, I couldn't believe it. You came walking through the door with the package of toilet paper. So clearly it worked out.
I got the last roll.
Oh, you did? That's funny.
The last pack of it. But, I mean, my belief is that if none of this magic and God and all this stuff is real, who cares? In the meantime, I'm having fun with it.
Bingo.
I could be suffering, or I could say, hey, you know, we're all getting a little extra time off and things are cleaner than they've ever been.
Yeah.
And tickets for flights are cheaper than ever. I mean, and find the silver lining.
Love it.
I mean, that's what keeps me going, because if it's all bullshit, I'm happier than I've ever been. And I'm getting the most out of each day. And as the law of attraction says, I keep attracting more and more of what I want.
Totally.
And I find literally things come to me when I'm least expecting it. And it's working. So I'm a believer and I'm going to keep going.
Well, and to that point, you know, I had such a hard time with people who are so positive. And I do think there's this sort of, you know, fake, inauthentic bullshit, ultra positivity part of our culture that exists. But that genuine, authentic, like, all right, I'm done with dwelling in the negative. My goal is to focus optimistically, find the silver lining, to, you know, really appreciate now, to really be able to say, you know, yes, I'd like to have a bigger house, but I love our place. I've lived here now 5 years. This place has been so good to me. I love this couch. It was a cheaper buy, but I loved it. It's been the first couch for our videos. And by doing that, all of a sudden, more good things happen, because I think I'm just in a better place for it. I'm in a better mood. My life, if it ends today, I'm in a good mood, as opposed to one that's, I'm like, I don't like the way things are going. And you nailed it. I agree. Like, so if it is all bullshit, fine. But we each have to decide what we're going to make our day go like.
Yeah, all we have is right. The only thing we're sure of is right now.
Yep.
Which all went back to my very first understanding of this stuff, is be here now with Ram Dass and Eckhart Tolle and just enjoy this, because it is so fleeting.
Yep.
And it is gone so quick. And even if it lasts a lot longer, why not get the most out of it? But it's fun. It's a beautiful, wild ride.
Totally is. I agree. Yeah. All right.